The silence in the briefing room was heavy as Commander Jake Morrison studied the satellite images spread across the metal table. The faces of his SEAL team members reflected the same grim understanding that had settled in his gut, like a cold stone. This wasn't going to be a routine operation. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rivera leaned forward, his weathered hands tracing the mountain ridges on the photograph. 23 years in special operations had taught him to read terrain like others read books, and what he saw here made his jaw tighten. The target compound sat like a fortress carved in the mountainside, surrounded by natural choke points and elevated positions that would turn any approach into a deadly gamble. Intelligence reports confirmed the presence of Hassan al-Nasir. Morrison began, his voice cutting through the tension. High-value target, responsible for coordinating attacks that have killed over 200 coalition forces in the past 18 months. The window to take him out is narrow, 72 hours before he moves to a new location. The team knew al-Nasir's reputation well. The man was a ghost, appearing just long enough to orchestrate devastating attacks before vanishing into the mountain networks he knew better than anyone. This was their first real chance to end his reign of terror. But the cost of failure would be measured in more than just a botched mission. Petty Officer First Class David Chun, the team's primary sniper, studied the approach routes with a methodical precision that had kept him alive through 4 deployments. The shooting positions were limited, the escape routes even more so. Everything about this mission violated the basic principles of sniper tactics he'd been taught at the Naval Special Warfare Center. "Sir, the optimal shooting position is here." Chun pointed to a rocky outcrop roughly 800 meters from the compound. "But it's completely exposed. No cover, no concealment, and only one way in or out. It's a suicide position." Morrison nodded grimly. They all knew it, but the mission parameters left them no choice. The compound's location made any other approach impossible, and waiting for a better opportunity meant letting al-Nasir slip away again. How many more soldiers would die while they waited for perfect conditions that might never come? The insertion went smoothly at first. Under cover of darkness, the 8-man team fast-roped from helicopters into the rugged Afghan terrain, their night vision equipment turning the moonless landscape into an eerie green wilderness. They moved like shadows through the rocky valleys, each man carrying 60 pounds of gear, and the weight of knowing this mission could change everything. Specialist Tommy Walsh, barely 24, but already a veteran of 2 previous deployments, felt his heart hammering against his chest plate as they approached the target area. The intelligence briefing had made it clear al-Nasir would only be vulnerable for a few hours while meeting with local commanders. Miss this window, and they might not get another chance for months. The team established their position just as the first rays of dawn painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Chun set up his rifle with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. The M24 sniper weapon system felt familiar in his hands, an extension of his will that had served him faithfully through countless missions. But as the sun climbed higher, everything began to go wrong. The first sign of trouble came from Petty Officer Rodriguez, manning the communication equipment. His voice was tight with concern as he whispered into his headset, "Command, this is Bravo Team. We're picking up increased radio chatter from the compound. Multiple voices. Sounds like they're expecting something." Morrison felt the familiar chill that came with operations about to turn sideways. In his 15 years of special operations, he'd learned to trust that feeling. The enemy's radio activity suggested they weren't walking into an unsuspecting target. They were walking into a trap. Chun adjusted his scope, scanning the compound through the powerful optics. The building that intelligence had identified as al-Nasir's meeting location remained dark and seemingly empty. No movement, no signs of life, nothing that would indicate their high-value target was present or planning to be. "Something's not right," Chun murmured, his eyes still pressed to the scope. "The compound should be showing activity by now. Guards, vehicles, something. It's too quiet." Sergeant First Class Mike Anderson, the team's demolitions expert, was monitoring the approaches with high-power binoculars. What he saw made his blood run cold. "Contact, contact," he hissed. "Movement on the ridgeline, 2 o'clock. I count at least 6 armed figures, and they're moving to flank our position." The ambush was expertly coordinated. While the SEAL team had been focused on the compound below, enemy fighters had used the terrain to maneuver into positions that would cut off their escape routes. It was a classic mountain warfare tactic, and they had walked straight into it. Morrison's mind raced through their options, none of them good. They could try to fight their way out, but they were outnumbered and in an exposed position. They could call for extraction, but the helicopters were hours away and might not be able to reach them in time. Or they could complete the mission, hoping that Al-Nasir would still appear and that taking him out would be worth the cost. The decision was made for them when the first bullets began cracking overhead. Enemy fire erupted from 3 different directions simultaneously. The distinctive sound of AK-47 rifles mixing with the deeper bark of heavy machine guns. The rocky outcrop that Chun had called a suicide position was proving to be exactly that. Chunks of stone exploded around them as high-velocity rounds sought their flesh. "Return fire! Return fire!" Morrison shouted, though his voice was nearly lost in the chaos of battle. His team responded with the disciplined aggression that had been drilled into them through years of training. Their M4 carbines chattered in controlled bursts, seeking targets among the rocks and shadows where muzzle flashes revealed enemy positions. But they were fighting an enemy that knew these mountains intimately, fighters who had been born in these valleys and had spent their entire lives learning every hiding spot and shooting position. The Taliban and Al-Qaeda operatives surrounding them weren't just defending their territory, they were defending their home. Chun tried to maintain his sniper position, but the incoming fire was too intense. Bullets whined off the rocks inches from his head, forcing him to abandon his carefully prepared shooting position and seek whatever cover he could find. The mission they had trained months for was falling apart in minutes. "We need immediate extraction," Rodriguez called into his radio, his voice competing with the sound of gunfire. "Bravo team is surrounded and taking heavy fire. Repeat, we need immediate extraction." The response from command was what they all feared to hear. "Bravo team, nearest extraction assets are 45 minutes out. You need to hold your position and complete the mission if possible." 45 minutes might as well have been 45 hours. At the rate they were burning through ammunition and taking fire, the team wouldn't last half that long. The enemy was closing in from multiple directions, using the terrain to advance while staying concealed from return fire. Anderson triggered one of his explosive charges, placed earlier as a defensive measure. The blast sent rocks and debris flying, temporarily disrupting one avenue of attack, but there were too many others. For every position they neutralized, 2 more seemed to open up. Walsh felt something hot and wet running down his arm and realized he'd been hit. The bullet had grazed his shoulder, more of a burn than a serious wound, but it was a reminder of how quickly things could turn fatal. He pressed a field dressing against the injury and kept firing, knowing that stopping to properly treat the wound could mean death for all of them. Chun made one last desperate attempt to complete their original mission. Crawling to a partially exposed position, he brought his rifle to bear on the compound below. Through his scope, he could see figures moving inside the main building. It looked like their intelligence had been correct after all. Al-Nasir was there, just as predicted. But before Chun could line up a shot, a sniper's bullet punched through the rocks just inches from his head, sending stone fragments slicing across his face. Blood ran into his eyes as he rolled away from the position. The mission now impossible to complete. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. The world's most elite snipers, trained at the best facilities with the most advanced equipment, were being outfought by enemy marksmen using decades-old rifles and iron sights. Skill and technology meant nothing when the enemy had the high ground and knew every inch of the battlefield. "We need to move," Morrison shouted over the gunfire. "Fall back to secondary position." But as his team began their fighting withdrawal, Morrison realized they were trapped more completely than he had first understood. The enemy hadn't just ambushed them. They had spent hours, perhaps days, preparing this trap. Every escape route was covered. Every piece of cover was under observation. They weren't just outgunned. They were outmaneuvered by fighters who had turned these mountains into a killing field. As the team huddled in whatever protection the rocks could provide, Morrison found himself facing a terrible choice. They could try to hold out and hope extraction arrived in time, knowing that ammunition and luck were both running low. Or they could attempt a desperate breakout that would almost certainly cost lives. Neither option offered much hope, and Morrison was beginning to understand that this mission might be their last. The enemy fire was intensifying, growing more accurate as the fighters adjusted to their positions. Time was running out, and help was still too far away. In the chaos and noise of battle, none of them noticed the lone figure watching from a concealed position nearly a kilometer away. Someone who had been tracking the mission from the beginning, someone with skills that didn't appear in any official military record, someone who was about to change everything. The real story was just beginning. From her concealed position high above the valley, Alex Hunter watched through powerful binoculars as the SEAL team's carefully planned operation dissolved into chaos. She had been tracking their movements since their insertion 12 hours earlier, anticipating this moment with the cold precision that had kept her alive through missions that officially never happened. Alex didn't look like someone who could single-handedly turn the tide of a mountain firefight. At 5 feet 6 inches with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, she might have been mistaken for a field researcher or aid worker, if not for the way she moved, with a controlled economy of motion that marked someone accustomed to violence. Her equipment was minimal compared to the SEAL team below: a single rifle, basic survival gear, and tools that most military personnel wouldn't recognize. But Alex Hunter was not most military personnel. Her official record, if anyone had the clearance to read it, would show 8 years of service with the Army's 75th Ranger Regiment, followed by a transfer to an intelligence unit that didn't appear on any organizational chart. What it wouldn't show were the 18 months she had spent in these exact mountains, living among the local population and learning the terrain with an intimacy that no satellite imagery could provide. The program that had brought her here was so classified that even the Pentagon officials who funded it weren't entirely sure what they were paying for. Officially called the Cultural Integration Assessment Project, it was designed to place specially selected soldiers deep undercover in hostile territory to gather intelligence and build relationships with local allies. Unofficially, it was about creating ghosts, operatives who could disappear completely into foreign environments and emerge when least expected. Alex had volunteered for the program after her second tour with the Rangers, driven by a combination of patriotic duty and personal demons that she rarely discussed with anyone. Growing up in rural Montana, she had learned to hunt before she could properly ride a bike, developing an almost supernatural ability to read terrain and track prey through wilderness that would challenge experienced outdoorsmen. Her father, a Vietnam veteran turned hunting guide, had taught her that patience was the most important weapon in any arsenal. "The mountain will teach you everything you need to know," he would say during their long hunting trips, "but only if you're willing to listen." Those lessons had served her well in Afghanistan, where she had spent months living in remote villages, learning local dialects and customs while gathering intelligence on Taliban supply routes and safe houses. She had become something that military planners had thought impossible: a Western soldier who could move through Afghan mountain communities without being detected as an outsider. But the cost of that ability had been steep. The psychological toll of living a double life, of befriending people she might eventually have to betray, had nearly broken her. She had requested extraction from the program 6 months earlier, only to be told that her mission was too valuable to abandon. One more assignment, they promised. One more target, and then she could go home. That target was Hassan al-Nasir. Alex had been tracking the terrorist leader for 3 months, following a trail of intelligence that led from village to village through the mountainous border region. She had gotten closer to al-Nasir than any other operative, close enough to know his habits, his routines, and the location where he would be vulnerable. The SEAL team's mission had been planned without any knowledge of her presence in the area. From their perspective, this was a straightforward direct action raid based on signals intelligence and satellite surveillance. They had no way of knowing that someone had already been watching their target for months, learning patterns that couldn't be detected from satellite photos or intercepted communications. Through her binoculars, Alex could see the tactical situation developing exactly as she had predicted. The enemy fighters surrounding the SEAL team weren't random Taliban insurgents. They were al-Nasir's personal security force, handpicked fighters who had been waiting for exactly this kind of assault. The compound below wasn't just a meeting location. It was bait in a trap that had been months in the making. The enemy commander was a man Alex knew by sight and reputation, Khalil Haqqani, a veteran fighter who had been battling foreign forces in these mountains for over 20 years. Haqqani understood Western military tactics better than most American officers, having studied captured manuals and debriefed prisoners for decades. He knew that American forces relied heavily on air support, advanced communications, and superior firepower to overcome tactical disadvantages. But in these mountains, those advantages could be neutralized by fighters who knew every cave and cliff face. Haqqani had turned the terrain itself into a weapon, using the mountain geography to create killing zones that would channel enemy forces into prepared ambush sites. Alex watched through her optics as Haqqani's men moved with practiced precision, advancing on the pinned SEAL team from multiple directions. Each fighter knew his role in the choreographed assault, moving from cover to cover with the confidence that comes from intimate knowledge of the battlefield. The American team was fighting with courage and skill, but they were fighting blind. Every defensive position they took had been anticipated. Every escape route had been blocked in advance. Haqqani had spent months preparing for this moment, studying American tactics and creating countermeasures for every likely response. From her elevated position, Alex could see the entire battlefield spread out like a three-dimensional chess game. She could trace the movements of every fighter, predict the flow of the battle, and identify the key points where intervention might change the outcome. But intervention would mean revealing herself, abandoning the cover that had kept her safe for months, and exposing the intelligence network she had spent so long building. Her radio, set to a frequency that didn't appear in any standard military communications plan, crackled with a coded message from her handler. Observer 7, this is Control. What is your status? Alex keyed her microphone twice, the signal that she was in position and observing. She could hear the unspoken question in Control's voice. Are you going to act? The original plan had been for Alex to gather intelligence on al-Nasir's location and then guide a precision strike that would eliminate him without risking American lives. But the SEAL team's uncoordinated assault had changed everything. Now their presence threatened not just the mission, but the entire intelligence operation that Alex had spent months developing. If the SEAL team was captured or killed, their bodies would be searched, their equipment examined, and their communications analyzed. Haqqani's intelligence network would piece together information that could compromise every source and contact that Alex had cultivated. Years of patient intelligence work would be lost, and future operations in the region would become nearly impossible. But if she acted to save them, she would blow her own cover and likely sacrifice any chance of completing her original mission. Al-Nasir would disappear back into the mountain networks, and the opportunity to eliminate him might not come again for years. Alex studied the compound through her scope, searching for any sign of their primary target. Al-Nasir was supposedly inside the main building, but she had no visual confirmation. The entire operation might be based on faulty intelligence, a possibility that grew stronger as she watched the perfectly orchestrated ambush unfold below. Through her earpiece, she could hear fragments of the SEAL team's radio traffic. Their communications discipline was breaking down as the tactical situation deteriorated, voices tight with stress and the knowledge that they were running out of options. Bravo team, be advised extraction is delayed, came a transmission from their command post. Heavy weather moving in, helicopter assets cannot reach your position for at least 90 minutes. 90 minutes. Alex knew the SEAL team wouldn't last half that long. Their ammunition was finite, their positions were exposed, and Haqqani's fighters were closing in with methodical precision. Unless something changed dramatically, she was about to witness the annihilation of an entire special operations team. The decision crystallized in her mind with the same cold clarity that had guided her through dozens of life-or-death moments. The mission to eliminate al-Nasir was important, but it wasn't worth 8 American lives. Her cover was valuable, but not more valuable than the soldiers fighting for their lives in the valley below. Alex began her preparations with the methodical efficiency that had been drilled into her through years of specialized training. Her rifle was a custom-built weapon that didn't appear in any military inventory, designed specifically for the kind of long-range precision shooting that her missions required. The scope was equally specialized, incorporating range-finding and environmental sensors that could compensate for factors that would defeat conventional sniper systems. But equipment was only part of the equation. The real advantage lay in her intimate knowledge of the terrain and the enemy's tactics. She had watched Haqqani's men train in these mountains, had studied their movement patterns and communication methods during months of patient observation. She knew their strengths, their weaknesses, and the psychological factors that motivated them. Most importantly, she knew they weren't expecting her. Haqqani's entire tactical plan was based on the assumption that he was facing a single, isolated enemy unit with no outside support. His fighters were focused entirely on the SEAL team's position, confident that they had achieved complete tactical surprise and numerical superiority. That confidence was about to become a fatal weakness. Alex adjusted her position slightly, finding a shooting angle that would allow her to engage multiple targets while maintaining concealment. The range was extreme, over 1,200 meters, but within the capabilities of her equipment and training. More challenging would be the psychological impact of her intervention. Haqqani's men were veterans, but they had never faced an enemy who seemed to appear from nowhere, striking with precision from impossible distances. The sudden death of key personnel from an unknown threat would shatter their tactical coordination and create the chaos that the SEAL team needed to escape. But success would require perfect execution. Miss the first shot, give away her position too early, and she would simply become another target in Haqqani's trap. The margin for error was non-existent, and the consequences of failure would be measured in American lives. Alex settled into her firing position, controlling her breathing as she had been taught years earlier on the ranges at Fort Benning. The mountain air was thin and cold, requiring adjustments to her calculations that had become second nature after months in this environment. Wind speed was minimal, visibility was excellent, and the targets were beginning to present themselves exactly as she had anticipated. Through her scope, she could see Haqqani himself, directing the assault from a protected position that he believed was beyond the range of any American weapon. His confidence in that assumption was about to be tested. Alex's finger found the trigger, applying the steady pressure that would send a carefully aimed bullet across more than a kilometer of mountain air. In seconds, everything would change. The hidden war she had been fighting alone was about to become very public, and there would be no going back to the shadows afterward. But sometimes, she reflected in the final moment before firing, the shadows had to step into the light to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The first shot split the mountain air with a crack that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. 1,200 meters away, Khalil Haqqani's head snapped back as a 175-grain bullet found its mark with surgical precision. His body crumpled behind the boulder that had been his command position, and in an instant, the carefully coordinated assault began to unravel. Alex had chosen her target with calculated precision. Haqqani wasn't just the tactical commander. He was the nerve center of the entire operation. His death would create confusion, disruption, and, most importantly, fear. The fighters below had never faced an enemy who could reach out and kill with such devastating accuracy from an unknown position. She worked the bolt of her rifle with practiced efficiency, ejecting the spent cartridge and chambering a new round while maintaining her sight picture through the scope. Already, she could see the effect of her first shot rippling through the enemy formation. Fighters were looking around wildly, trying to identify the source of the unexpected attack. Her second target was Haqqani's deputy, a scarred veteran who was already reaching for the radio to coordinate a response. Alex's bullet caught him in the chest as he rose from cover, sending him tumbling down the rocky slope. 2 shots, 2 kills, and the enemy's command structure was in shambles. From his position with the Penn SEAL team, Commander Morrison heard the distant rifle shots and felt a surge of confusion mixed with desperate hope. The sound wasn't coming from any of his men's weapons, and the trajectory suggested a firing position that should have been impossible to reach undetected. "Did anyone call for sniper support?" he shouted over the continuing gunfire, though he already knew the answer. Their mission had been planned in complete isolation, with no outside assets available for support. Yet someone was clearly engaging the enemy from an elevated position, and their shooting was devastatingly accurate. Chun, the team's primary sniper, was monitoring the enemy positions when 2 more figures suddenly collapsed in his field of view. The shots were coming from a direction that put them at an extreme range, well beyond what most military snipers would attempt under combat conditions. "Sir, someone's engaging from the North Ridge," Chun reported, his voice tight with professional interest and personal relief. "Range has got to be over 1,000 meters, and whoever it is, they're not missing." Alex was already transitioning to her next target when she saw movement in the compound below. Through her scope, she could see figures emerging from the main building, one of them matching the physical description of Hassan al-Nasir from her intelligence files. The high-value target was finally showing himself, drawn out by the chaos of the unexpected sniper attack. But al-Nasir was also moving toward a vehicle that would allow him to escape, disappearing into the mountain networks where finding him again might take months or years. Alex had to make a choice: continue supporting the SEAL team's escape, or take the shot that could end al-Nasir's reign of terror forever. The decision took less than a second. Al-Nasir was her primary mission, the reason she had spent months in these mountains building an intelligence network and gathering targeting information. 8 American lives hung in the balance, but potentially hundreds more could be saved if she eliminated the terrorist leader now. Alex shifted her aim toward the compound, calculating range and windage for the new target. Al-Nasir was moving quickly toward an armored vehicle, using buildings and terrain features for cover. She would have one clear shot as he crossed an open area near the vehicle, a window of opportunity that would last maybe 2 seconds. The range was extreme, nearly 1,300 meters with the additional challenge of a moving target. Even with her specialized equipment and months of practice in these conditions, the shot was at the absolute limit of what was possible. But Alex had spent her entire military career making impossible shots when everything depended on precision. She tracked al-Nasir through her scope, calculating his movement speed and direction while accounting for the ballistic variables that would affect a bullet's flight at that distance. Wind speed, air density, temperature gradients, the rotation of the Earth itself, all factors that had to be considered for a shot of this magnitude. Al-Nasir emerged from cover, moving with the confident stride of someone who believed himself beyond the reach of any enemy weapon. For a brief moment, he was silhouetted against the white stone of a building wall, presenting a target that existed for exactly 1.8 seconds. Alex's finger squeezed the trigger with the same smooth pressure she had practiced thousands of times on ranges from Georgia to Colorado. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and she immediately began tracking through the scope to observe the impact. The bullet's flight time at that range was nearly 2 seconds, an eternity in combat where targets could move, take cover, or simply disappear behind obstacles. Alex watched through her optics as al-Nasir continued his movement toward the vehicle, apparently unaware that death was racing toward him at over 2,000 feet per second. The impact was visible even at that extreme range. Al-Nasir stumbled, spun, and collapsed just meters from the safety of his armored vehicle. The terrorist leader who had orchestrated attacks across Afghanistan lay motionless in the dust, eliminated by a shot that would be talked about in sniper schools for years to come. But Alex didn't have time to appreciate the successful elimination of her primary target. The SEAL team below was still trapped and under fire, and Al-Nasir's security force was beginning to recover from the shock of losing their commanders. She needed to maintain pressure on the enemy fighters while creating an opportunity for the Americans to escape. She shifted back to engaging the enemy positions around the SEAL team, working with methodical precision to eliminate the fighters who posed the greatest threat. Each shot was carefully planned, targeting key personnel who were directing the assault or operating crew-served weapons that could devastate the American position. The psychological effect was as important as the physical casualties. Enemy fighters began to abandon their positions, unwilling to remain exposed to an invisible sniper who seemed capable of hitting any target regardless of range or cover. The coordinated assault that had threatened to overwhelm the SEAL team dissolved into individual fighters seeking personal survival. From his position, Morrison could see the dramatic change in the tactical situation. Enemy fire was slackening, and fighters who had been aggressively advancing were now retreating to deeper cover. Whoever was providing sniper support was systematically dismantling the ambush that had threatened to destroy his entire team. All teams, this is Bravo 6, Morrison transmitted on the team frequency. Unknown sniper is engaging enemy positions from our north. Prepare to move on my command. We're going to use this opportunity to break contact and move to extraction point Alpha. Chen was already packing his equipment, but he couldn't resist taking a moment to study the distant muzzle flashes that marked their mysterious supporter's position. As a professional sniper himself, he was awed by the precision and range of the shooting he was witnessing. Shots that would be challenging for him at 400 or 500 meters were being made consistently at ranges that seemed impossible. Whoever that is, Chen muttered to Rodriguez, who was monitoring enemy radio frequencies, they're making shots I couldn't make with perfect conditions and all day to set up. Rodriguez was listening to increasingly frantic enemy communications as fighters reported that their commanders were dead and their positions were being targeted by an unknown sniper. The discipline and coordination that had marked their initial ambush was completely gone, replaced by confusion and fear. Alex could see the SEAL team beginning to move, taking advantage of the chaos she had created to attempt their escape. But she also knew that Haqqani's men weren't finished yet. There were still fighters in positions that could threaten the American withdrawal, and it would take continued pressure to keep them suppressed long enough for the team to reach safety. She engaged 2 more targets in rapid succession, fighters who were trying to reposition to block the SEAL team's escape route. The shots were at slightly shorter range, but required quick target acquisition and engagement, skills that Alex had developed through years of specialized training. The custom rifle performed flawlessly, its precision-built components working in perfect harmony to deliver bullets exactly where Alex aimed them. But the weapon was only as good as the person using it, and Alex's combination of natural talent and intensive training allowed her to exploit its full potential. As the SEAL team moved through the rocky terrain toward their extraction point, Alex provided overwatch from her concealed position. She could see enemy fighters attempting to follow, but her continued presence made any pursuit extremely dangerous. A few fighters tried to advance, only to be driven back by precisely placed shots that demonstrated her complete control of the battlefield. The enemy radio traffic that Rodriguez was monitoring told the story of a fighting force in complete disarray. Units were reporting heavy casualties, commanders were dead or missing, and the mysterious sniper seemed capable of engaging any target regardless of position or protection. Bravo 6, this is command, came a transmission that Morrison had been waiting to hear. Weather is clearing, extraction assets are inbound to your location. ETA 12 minutes. 12 minutes. The SEAL team just needed to hold out for 12 more minutes, and they would be clear of the mountain trap that had nearly cost them everything. But Alex knew that the enemy would make one more attempt to prevent their escape, throwing everything they had left into a final desperate assault. She was right. As the sound of approaching helicopters became audible in the distance, the remaining enemy fighters launched a coordinated attack on the SEAL team's position. They were no longer trying to capture or pin down the Americans. This was purely about revenge, about making the foreign soldiers pay a blood price before they could escape. Alex's rifle spoke again, and again, each shot carefully aimed to disrupt the enemy assault and protect the Americans who were fighting their way to the extraction point. She could see muzzle flashes from the SEAL team's weapons as they returned fire, their training and discipline evident even in the chaos of a running firefight. The extraction helicopters appeared over the ridgeline, their door gunners already engaging enemy positions with devastating effect. The AH-6 Little Bird gunships that accompanied them added their firepower to the battle, suppressing enemy positions with rockets and machine gun fire. But even as the SEAL team reached their extraction point and began boarding the helicopters, Alex remained in position. Her mission wasn't complete until every American was safely away from the battlefield. She maintained her overwatch, ready to engage any threat that might emerge during the critical moments of extraction. The helicopters lifted off with their precious cargo, banking away from the mountain battlefield as their door gunners maintained suppressing fire. Alex watched through her scope as the aircraft disappeared over the horizon, carrying 8 soldiers who had come closer to death than they would ever fully realize. Only then did she allow herself to acknowledge what she had accomplished. In less than 20 minutes, she had eliminated a high-value target that had eluded capture for months, dismantled an experienced enemy fighting force, and saved the lives of an entire special operations team. But her work in these mountains was far from over. As the dust from the helicopter rotors settled and silence returned to the mountain battlefield, Alex Hunter faced a harsh reality that went far beyond the tactical victory she had just achieved. Her intervention had saved 8 American lives and eliminated a high-value target, but it had also shattered the carefully constructed cover that had taken months to build. Every intelligence asset she had cultivated, every relationship she had developed with local sources, every piece of the network that had made her so effective, all of it was now compromised. The moment she had opened fire from that ridgeline, she had signed a death warrant for her operational identity. Alex moved quickly but carefully from her firing position, knowing that enemy fighters would soon be searching for the sniper who had decimated their force. Her route had been planned months earlier as part of her emergency extraction protocol, but she had never expected to use it under these circumstances. The mountain terrain that had been her ally during months of covert operations was now a dangerous maze where every shadow could hide an enemy fighter seeking revenge. The local population that had provided her with cover and intelligence would now view her with suspicion and fear, knowing that association with her could bring deadly retaliation. Her radio crackled with an encrypted transmission from Control, the first direct communication she had received in weeks. Observer 7, Control. Confirm status and prepare for immediate extraction. Alex hesitated before responding. Extraction would mean leaving Afghanistan forever, abandoning the mission she had spent so long preparing for and the intelligence networks that had cost so much to develop. But staying meant operating without support in an environment that was now actively hostile, with every government and insurgent force in the region hunting for the ghost sniper who had appeared from nowhere. Control, Observer 7. Target eliminated, friendly casualties prevented. But extraction is not possible at this time, she transmitted, knowing that her handler would understand the implications. The silence that followed told her everything she needed to know. Control was processing the fact that their most valuable intelligence asset had just chosen to remain in the field despite having completed her mission and compromised her cover. It was a decision that went against every protocol and training guideline, but Alex knew she couldn't leave yet. The elimination of al-Nasir had created a power vacuum that would reshape the entire regional insurgent network. His lieutenants would fight each other for control, new alliances would form, and critical intelligence about future operations could be gathered if someone was positioned to observe the transition. That someone could only be Alex, despite the enormous personal risk. Moving through terrain she knew intimately, Alex made her way to a safe house that existed in no official records. It was one of several bolt holes she had prepared during her months in the mountains, each stocked with supplies and communications equipment that could sustain her for weeks if necessary. The safe house was hidden in a cave system that had been used by resistance fighters against the Soviets decades earlier. Alex had discovered it during her initial reconnaissance of the area and had carefully prepared it as an emergency refuge, never imagining she would need it under these circumstances. As she settled into the concealed position, Alex began monitoring enemy radio frequencies and conducting surveillance of the valley below. What she observed over the following hours confirmed her suspicions about the importance of staying in the field. Al-Nasir's death had sent shockwaves through the entire insurgent network. Radio traffic indicated that his lieutenants were already maneuvering for position, each claiming legitimate succession while building alliances with different tribal and political factions. The unified command structure that had made al-Nasir so dangerous was fragmenting into competing groups that could be played against each other. But Alex also detected signs of something more ominous. Al-Nasir's network had been planning a major operation, something that involved coordination with insurgent cells across multiple provinces. Without their leader, that operation was in chaos, but it wasn't canceled. Different factions were trying to claim control of whatever al-Nasir had been planning, and the result could be even more devastating than the original plot. Through patient observation and careful monitoring of communications, Alex began to piece together fragments of intelligence about the planned operation. References to the wedding, special guests, and gifts for the foreign friends suggested an attack on a high-profile target, possibly involving foreign diplomats or military leaders. The intelligence was too fragmented to act upon immediately, but Alex recognized that she was uniquely positioned to gather the complete picture. Her months in the region had given her knowledge of local customs, communication patterns, and relationship networks that no outside analyst could match. She could connect dots that others wouldn't even recognize as related. But staying in the field meant accepting risks that went far beyond the possibility of being killed or captured. Alex was now completely cut off from support, operating without backup or extraction options in an environment where every day brought new dangers. Worse, her presence was affecting the very intelligence she was trying to gather. Local sources who had trusted her were now afraid to make contact, knowing that she was being hunted by both government forces and insurgent groups. The careful relationships she had built were dissolving under the pressure of her exposed status, making her job exponentially more difficult. Alex's handler at Control was growing increasingly concerned as days passed without any contact. The program that had placed her in Afghanistan operated under strict oversight from multiple government agencies, and her decision to remain in the field was creating political problems at the highest levels. Observer 7, this is Control, came an encrypted transmission after 3 days of radio silence. You are ordered to report to Extraction Point Delta within 24 hours. This is not a request. Alex stared at the radio for long moments before responding. Following orders would mean returning to safety, debriefing sessions, and probably a transfer to some desk job where her specialized skills would be wasted. But disobeying direct orders would end her military career and possibly result in criminal charges. Control, Observer 7. I understand your directive, but I have intelligence indicating an imminent high-value operation. Request permission to continue mission for 72 hours. The response was swift and final. Observer 7, permission denied. You are compromised and ineffective. Extract immediately or face disciplinary action. Alex turned off the radio and stared out at the mountain landscape that had become her world. The professional soldier in her recognized that Control was right. she was compromised, her cover was blown, and continuing to operate would be both dangerous and potentially counterproductive. But the part of her that had volunteered for this mission in the first place, the drive to protect American lives and prevent terrorist attacks, couldn't accept walking away when she was so close to uncovering something important. She made her choice with the same cold calculation that had guided her sniper shooting. Alex would stay in the field despite direct orders to the contrary, gathering intelligence until she either completed her mission or was killed attempting it. It was a decision that would effectively end her military career, but some things were more important than personal consequences. Over the following week, Alex operated like a true ghost, moving through the mountains and observing insurgent activities while avoiding the multiple forces that were hunting for her. Government troops were searching for the sniper who had intervened in the SEAL team operation. Insurgent fighters wanted revenge for their fallen leaders, and American Special Operations Forces were under orders to locate and extract her by any means necessary. But Alex had advantages that none of her hunters fully appreciated. Her months in the region had taught her to think and move like a local, to blend into the mountain environment in ways that frustrated both high-tech surveillance and human trackers. She was no longer an American soldier operating in foreign territory. She had become something more dangerous and unpredictable. The intelligence she gathered during this period was unlike anything that conventional operations could have produced. She observed secret meetings between insurgent leaders, recorded communications about planned attacks, and identified supply routes and safe houses that had been hidden from satellite surveillance. Most importantly, she began to understand the true scope of the operation that al-Nasir had been planning before his death. The fragmentary communications she had been monitoring were part of a coordinated attack on a peace summit scheduled to take place in Kabul, an event that would bring together American diplomats, NATO commanders, and Afghan government officials in a single location. The attack wasn't just intended to kill high-value targets. It was designed to shatter the fragile political agreements that were keeping Afghanistan from complete chaos. Al-Nasir had spent months positioning assets and resources for an assault that would require his death and the subsequent power struggle to succeed. Alex realized with growing horror that eliminating al-Nasir might have been exactly what the terrorist leader had intended. His death had created the chaotic conditions necessary for the final phase of his plan, and his lieutenants were now competing to claim credit for completing their leader's masterpiece. The peace summit was scheduled to begin in 4 days, and Alex was the only person in position to gather the intelligence necessary to stop it. But transmitting that intelligence would reveal her location to the multiple forces hunting for her, and she had no guarantee that anyone would listen to warnings from a soldier who had already disobeyed direct orders. As she prepared her final intelligence report, Alex understood that she was facing the end of everything she had known. Her military career was over, her cover identity was completely burned, and her future held nothing but uncertainty. But she had volunteered for this mission to protect American lives and prevent terrorist attacks, and she would complete that mission regardless of personal cost. The Ghost in the Mountains had one more operation to conduct, and it would determine whether her sacrifices had any meaning at all. Alex Hunter crouched in the pre-dawn darkness, assembling her final intelligence report with a methodical precision that had kept her alive through months of impossible operations. The encrypted burst transmission she was preparing would reveal everything she had discovered about the planned attack on the Kabul Peace Summit. But sending it would also pinpoint her location for every enemy force in the region. The intelligence was devastating in its scope and implications. Al-Nasir hadn't just been planning a terrorist attack. He had orchestrated his own death as part of a psychological warfare operation designed to maximize the impact of his final strike. The power struggle among his lieutenants wasn't random chaos. It was a carefully scripted performance intended to convince security forces that the threat had diminished with his death. Through patient observation and signal intercepts, Alex had identified at least 12 operatives who had infiltrated Kabul over the past month. posing as everything from construction workers to government clerks. Each had been assigned specific targets within the Peace Summit venue, and their coordinated assault would turn the diplomatic gathering into a massacre that would shatter any hope for regional stability. But the most chilling aspect of al-Nasir's plan was its timeline. The attack was scheduled to begin exactly 72 hours after his death, when security forces would have concluded their initial investigations and relaxed their vigilance. His martyrdom would be followed by a spectacular assault that would make him a legend among jihadist groups worldwide. Alex checked her watch. 36 hours until the summit began. Even if her intelligence reached the right people immediately, there might not be enough time to identify and neutralize all the embedded operatives. But she had to try, knowing that failure would mean the deaths of hundreds of innocent people and the collapse of everything American forces had fought to achieve in Afghanistan. Her fingers moved across the encrypted communication device, encoding the intelligence package that represented months of dangerous work and irreplaceable insights into enemy operations. Names, locations, attack plans, communication frequencies, safe house addresses, everything that would be needed to dismantle the terrorist network before it could strike. As she prepared to transmit, Alex's enhanced hearing picked up sounds that made her blood run cold. Voices in the distance, speaking in Pashto and moving with the disciplined coordination that marked experienced fighters. Her location had been compromised, probably through signals intelligence or human sources who had been pressured to reveal information. The bitter irony wasn't lost on her. She had spent months as an invisible ghost, moving through these mountains without detection, only to be exposed at the moment when stealth mattered most. But Alex had always known this moment would come. The price of stepping out of the shadows to save the SEAL team had been the destruction of her operational security. She activated the transmission sequence while simultaneously beginning her emergency evacuation procedures. The encrypted burst would take 45 seconds to complete, time she might not have if the approaching voices belonged to a well-trained search team. Through her night vision equipment, Alex could see figures moving through the rocky terrain below her position. At least 8 fighters spread out in a search formation that suggested professional military training. They weren't random insurgents looking for revenge. They were specialists who had been brought in specifically to hunt her down. The transmission indicator showed 30 seconds remaining. Alex assembled her gear with practiced efficiency, knowing she would have to abandon much of it to escape quickly enough. Her custom rifle would have to stay behind. Its weight and bulk would slow her down too much during the desperate flight she was about to attempt. But she couldn't bring herself to leave the weapon intact for enemy forces to study and exploit. Working quickly, she removed critical components and scattered them across the rocky terrain, ensuring that even if the rifle was recovered, it would provide no useful intelligence about her equipment or capabilities. 20 seconds. The enemy voices were getting closer, and Alex could hear the distinctive sound of someone speaking into a radio. Her pursuers were coordinating their search with other units, trying to establish a perimeter that would prevent her escape. Standard counterinsurgency tactics applied with professional competence. 10 seconds. Alex shouldered her reduced pack and checked the route she had memorized weeks earlier for exactly this scenario. The escape path led through a narrow ravine that would provide concealment, but also limit her movement options. If the enemy had positioned blocking forces correctly, she might be running directly into an ambush. The transmission completed just as the first enemy fighter appeared on the ridge above her former position. Alex was already moving, flowing across the rocky terrain with the silent efficiency that had made her a ghost in these mountains. Behind her, she could hear shouts as the search team discovered her abandoned equipment and realized how close they had come to capturing their target. The pursuit began immediately, with disciplined voices coordinating the search through radio communications that Alex could monitor on her scanner. Her pursuers weren't just trying to capture her. They were trying to herd her toward predetermined positions where other forces were waiting. Alex recognized the tactical pattern from her own training in tracking and pursuit operations. The enemy commander was good, Probably someone with professional military experience who understood how Western Special Operations personnel were trained to evade capture. He was using that knowledge to predict her movement and position his forces accordingly. But Alex had spent months learning these mountains in ways that no briefing or map study could provide. She knew every goat trail, every hidden water source, every cave system that could provide temporary refuge. More importantly, she understood the psychological terrain, which local populations might provide assistance, and which would betray her location for money or safety. As dawn broke over the mountains, Alex found herself in a running battle that tested every skill she had developed during years of specialized training. Her pursuers were professional and well-equipped, but they were operating in terrain she knew intimately. The advantage shifted back and forth as the chase continued through ravines and across exposed ridges where a single mistake could prove fatal. By mid-morning, Alex had managed to break contact with the immediate pursuit, but she knew it was only temporary. Her transmission had been successful. She could see increased helicopter activity in the distance that suggested her intelligence was being acted upon. But she was now completely cut off from any possibility of rescue or support. Her satellite radio crackled with an incoming transmission on the emergency frequency reserved for critical communications. Observer 7, this is Falcon Command. Your intelligence has been received and is being acted upon. Multiple targets have been identified and operations are in progress. Alex keyed her microphone for what she knew would be the last time in her military career. Falcon Command, Observer 7. Glad to hear it. I'm compromised and evading, but the mission is complete. Observer 7. We have assets standing by for extraction. Proceed to Emergency Rally Point Charlie for immediate pickup. Rally Point Charlie was 8 kilometers away across terrain that was certainly being watched by enemy forces. Alex studied the mountain landscape around her, calculating routes and timing. It was possible she could reach the extraction point, but only if she was willing to take enormous risks and probably fight her way through multiple enemy positions. But as she prepared to attempt the dangerous journey, Alex's radio scanner picked up communications that changed everything. Her intelligence had been acted upon with devastating effectiveness. Security forces in Kabul were conducting coordinated raids across the city, rolling up the terrorist network before it could strike. The intercepts she was monitoring told a story of complete operational success. Safe houses were being raided, operatives were being arrested, and the carefully planned attack on the Peace Summit was falling apart as its key components were systematically eliminated. Listening to the fragmentary communications from panicked terrorist cells, Alex felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond personal survival. Her months of patient work, her decision to stay in the field despite direct orders, and her sacrifice of career and cover had prevented a massacre that could have killed hundreds and destabilized an entire region. The Peace Summit would proceed as scheduled, protected by intelligence that only she could have provided. American diplomats and military leaders would never know how close they had come to death, and the fragile political agreements they were negotiating would have a chance to succeed. As Alex began moving toward the extraction point, she reflected on the price she had paid for this success. Her military career was over, her identity was compromised beyond recovery, and her future was completely uncertain. She would return to a country that wouldn't recognize her sacrifices and couldn't acknowledge her achievements. But she had volunteered for this mission knowing the costs it might exact, and she had no regrets about the choices she had made. The Ghost in the Mountains had completed her final operation, and it was time to fade away forever. The extraction helicopter appeared over the ridge at exactly the scheduled time, its crew ready to pull one last operator out of the Afghan mountains. As Alex ran toward the landing zone, enemy fire erupted from multiple positions, but it was too late to prevent her escape. As the aircraft lifted off with its precious cargo, Alex looked down at the mountain battlefield that had been her home for so many months. Somewhere in those valleys were the remains of the intelligence network she had built, the the relationship she had cultivated, and the identity she had crafted to survive in an impossible environment. But she was also leaving behind something more tangible, proof that sometimes the most important battles are fought by people whose names will never appear in history books, whose sacrifices will never be publicly acknowledged, and whose victories will remain forever hidden in classified files. The war in Afghanistan would continue for years, fought by soldiers who would never know that their safety had been purchased by a ghost who had chosen duty over career and mission over survival. And in the shadows of conflicts yet to come, other operators would carry on the tradition of service that Alex Hunter had embodied, invisible guardians whose greatest victories would remain their most secret achievements. As the helicopter carried her toward an uncertain future, Alex closed her eyes and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She had been exactly what her country needed her to be, even when it meant sacrificing everything she had been before. The hidden elite veteran had completed her final mission, and it was time to disappear forever into the civilian world that would never understand what she had accomplished in the mountains of Afghanistan. But that was fine with Alex Hunter. Some stories were too important to be told, and some heroes were meant to remain in the shadows where they belonged. The ghost had come home at last,